Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Daring Live, all the way from San Diego, California. It is a pleasure once more to be with everybody here. Thrilled to have you all. It is a nice, beautiful, sunny afternoon here again. And today we've got a very, very cool guest. But before I introduce him, a quick reminder next week is what would otherwise be IBMA in Raleigh, North Carolina. This year, with everything going on, it is a virtual event. We do urge you to go to the World of Bluegrass, IBMA World of Bluegrass. You can sign up. Um, Join us. We have no fewer than four live sessions next week, all of which will be revealed on Monday. And then we have a slew of other things going on with the IBMA sign up as well that you can come check out. So, just a reminder for everybody there, if you would normally attend or if you just want to join for the first time in a virtual manner, go for it. We look forward to meeting you. All right, on to our guest. Thank you so much again. We are very excited today to welcome Mr. Dom Flemons. He's a Grammy Award winner, two-time Emmy nominee, and the 2020 United States Artist Fellow. Dom Flemons has branded the moniker the American Songster. He is a historian, a banjo historian, an artist. He is a scholar. He is a actor. He is everything you could ever imagine, and he is considered an expert banjo player, also taking on the harmonica, the jug, the bones, the quills, and other amazing instruments. I'd like to welcome Mr. Dom Flemons. How you doing, Dom?
Well, I'm doing well, Jamie. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all here at the for Deering Live.
It's a pleasure to have you. Absolutely. And then Mr. Dave, how are you? Back
Hey,
again?
how you doing? Good to be here.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. Well, thanks again. Let's get things kicked off, shall we? You want to play us a little tune in, and then we'll have a chat.
Sure thing. Well, in
All right.
2005, I went to the Black Banjo Gathering, and they told me about an album called Altamont. This is a song I learned from that album. This one's called Po Black Sheep. Oh, Lammy, Po Black Sheep ain't got no mammy.
Yeah, that's
Beautiful.
fantastic.
I love it. Love it.
Man, there's a lot I'd love to dig into about the playing style. Right there. There's a lot you did. But before we get into that, let's why don't we get into kind of how you got into playing the banjo and the different kind of folk styles that you play.
Absolutely. Well, my personal journey with the banjo began, I guess, back in around 1998, 1999. I saw a documentary on the history of rock and roll, and I got interested in playing the guitar. And there was a moment where, back in Phoenix, where I'm from, I went into the guitar shop to actually get a friend of mine a guitar, and
Uh-huh.
I ended up with a banjo, and it was a Ludwig four-string tenor banjo, a Dixie Ludwig banjo. And I didn't realize that there was a difference between four strings and five strings. I had only
Right.
seen banjo on TV, might have heard it on old jazz records, but I didn't really think much about there being a difference in styles or sounds at
Hmm.
that time. So when I learned the banjo, I learned a lot of songs I knew on the guitar first, and then I adapted them onto the banjo as I saw fit.
Mm.
And at the same time, I started to listen to records by people like Mike Seeger or Doc Boggs, Clarence Ashley, any number of players. And that sort of got me started on a path to wanting to learn the banjo. And then I heard Gus Cannon, and that changed everything. And then I was just learned a new type of banjo.
How'd Gus Cannon change everything for you? What'd you hear in that really spoke to you?
Well, there were two albums that I was obsessively listening to for many years when I was in college, and one of them was Blind Willie McTell's Last Session, which is a beautiful recording of the late great Blind Willie McTell, the blues singer.
Yeah.
And around the same time, I found an album called Gus Cannon, Walk Right In, which came out on Stax Record. And I was a big fan of soul music and early '60s soul music, so I recognized it by the label
Right.
and picked up the record and saw it was a banjo player. And when I heard Gus Cannon's story and I heard his banjo style, I was completely enthralled and drawn into that style. And I was studying literature. I got a degree in English, so I was studying amongst everything the depictions of African Americans within literature. And so when
Uh-huh.
I began to listen to Gus Cannon's music, I found another strain of that subject matter. So I began to follow his music and I began to enjoy it and listen to a lot of jug band music from Memphis Jug Band on. And I found a unique style of banjo that was blues based
Mm-hmm.
that I began to pursue. And then, of course, since I was in Arizona, there weren't a lot of banjo players. So I began to start doing blues jams where I would start playing blues on the banjo, even though in the
Uh-huh.
traditional
Yeah.
setting, you got
Mm-hmm.
or when I started to listen to Son House, and I
Right.
started to adapt old time country blues onto the banjo because I
Right.
found the polyrhythms fit.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I started out as a drummer actually in high school, and I played in a four bass drum marching band in the marching band when I was in high school. So the
Uh,
idea of polyrhythms in African American music always
right.
drew me in. And when I began to first, I started to play the banjo because I had heard. I just started to hear
Mm-hmm.
some of that beautiful polyrhythmic sound in a lot of that old time jazz, and
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to get that sound. I also love Caribbean music,
Right.
and I wanted to incorporate those type of sounds because when I began to start playing the banjo and I started to learn the chords, I found that there was a vocabulary that just by attack you could imply so many different styles. And so without any guidance at first up into 2005, I began to just teach myself to play. And then when I went to the Black Banjo Gathering, that was the first time I was able to find a framework that allowed me to think of it as a vernacular music or as a
Right.
ambassador and things like that. But before then, I just was interested in music and was experimenting.
And were you still playing the tenor banjo up to that point?
Always up to that point. The first banjo I got, actually, a friend of mine went on a trip to Europe, and he was another guitar player. He had a five string, and he'd taken the fifth string out of it.
Yeah.
And so I learned to play just, I mean, I could just show you an example. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, Alan, one of my favorites that I keep with me is Me and Julio Down by the Schoolyard by Paul Simon.
Sure.
But think of a wacky cartoon version. Well, Mama, damn, I rode that bitch, went to the police station. I found out he's been shot style investigation.
Yeah.
You know, and so on and so forth. And so
Yeah.
early on, when I was experimenting with how to play the instrument, there wasn't anybody to tell me that you can't play Paul Simon on it, or
Right.
I
Right.
used to play the Zombies. I used to do maybe after he's gone. She told me she loved me with love's a soft of morning. And I just experimented because the chords all made sense, and the banjo has a
Uh-huh.
way of being able to weave a lot of different polyrhythms. But of course, I was drawn to the sound of people like Clarence Ashley. Of course, I can't play any of the modal tunes right
Right.
now, just tuning. But I
Yeah.
used to play the cuckoo and Pretty Polly,
Uh-huh.
Little Katie, and also I used to play a lot of Doc Boggs. I used to play country blues, and
Right.
some Roscoe Holcomb numbers, and anything that I could find that had banjo in it. At that time, the Black Banjo Songsters of North Carolina and Virginia hadn't come onto my radar. That wouldn't be until I went to the Black Banjo Gathering and met C.C. Conway and began to reach deep into that history. But for me, it was always I always looked at it from a country blues angle.
Right.
Uh, you
Right.
know, that was always where I started.
And were you tuning it the tenor and standard tenor tuning or
It
another
was always
tuning?
an open G because I had
Oh,
got
okay.
five string and open G, and I learned a couple of tunings. I learned open C, open D with D, F sharp, A D for certain tunes. Also the like I said, the sawmill tuning.
Right.
Um, and then there's a version of Cindy I do where I drop the B string down to an A to get a modal tuning, so I can get kind of a. After I started listening to John Snipes, I kind of developed a way of playing like that.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, it gives you an extra third finger. You get the diddling 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 on one finger,
Yep.
and then
Yep.
you can Cindy or any of those things. So again, it was whatever songbooks I could find at that time until I went to North Carolina. It was just whatever I could find. I got into Papa Charlie Jackson just a little bit before, and I started to play his song "Your Baby Ain't Sweet Like Mine," and that got me interested in the six-string banjo. And so then I found one, and I first had a homemade one that someone had made that I bought in a guitar shop, and then I eventually found a real factory made one.
Mm-hmm. Get when did you start playing the plectrum banjo?
The plectrum banjo first, after I got that Ludwig banjo, which eventually fell apart, I got another banjo that fell apart, which was a Bakelite harmony banjo, tenor.
Right. Right.
And I always liked the longer neck of the plectrum banjo because I
Mm-hmm.
started on the five string, so I was able to, especially with playing blues, some of the stuff is a little easier with a longer scale.
Right.
And I was I got that Bakelite banjo and carried it with me forever. And after a certain point, as that thing started to fall apart, that was when I got to know the Deerings, and I actually ordered my very first Sierra plectrum banjo because I wanted the tone ring, because I wanted the volume. Because when I met Joe Thompson, uh, he pulled out his cousin Odell Thompson's banjo, and it was a gigantic bluegrass banjo with a tone ring. And I liked
Uh-huh.
the idea of getting that sort of volume and punch, especially in the context of playing blues and early jazz. That's sort of one of the aesthetic qualities that makes old time jazz and blues really different sounding than other types of music. And so I was drawn to that idea. So I wanted to get one of these. I had an open back Vega for many years that I played on tour, but the short scale was just tough for me to do, especially once we started playing much bigger venues. I really needed something that could hold down a whole concert in a big venue.
Right. That resonator really helps. Huh?
Oh yeah, and then just I love the sound of the banjo as well. Just the way that it's designed, and also the way that the backup fits on it. I liked it a little better than having an open back, especially for the type of material I was doing.
Right.
If I wanted to play something louder, I could lean on the back, and I could lean on the back. But if I wanted to be a little softer, I can, like if I'm comping behind somebody doing a jazz song, I can comp a little lighter, and the
Mm-hmm.
Sierra is great for doing both of those things.
And you're using G tuning as your main tuning on the plectrum?
Yeah, all G tuning,
Right.
and even when I teach my lessons, I always try to teach people, because again, if you're playing old time banjo and you're playing out of open G,
Yeah.
one thing to know is that you can still play all of the inversions all the way up the neck. But
Right.
a lot of times we don't spend the time, even if you're playing Cripple Creek, if you
Mm-hmm.
look at like
Right.
just to know that these inversions of the chords are what make that melody, it gives you a different perspective on how you play. Because when I was learning open tunings on the guitar, for example, I was learning songs like "Sitting on Top of the World" by
Yep.
Doc Watson, for example,
Yeah.
or off camera we were talking about Bob Dylan, "Blood on the Tracks," a lot of the
Yeah.
open D tuning. So I translate a lot of the things I learned with that style of folk guitar onto the banjo, and I found that they were able to communicate with each other. So a lot of country blues songs became easier for me to play on the banjo to translate back to the guitar, and then it worked the other way around. So then I'd learn, once I learned Furry Lewis's style of playing, then I could translate that onto the banjo. Even though Furry Lewis wasn't a banjo player, you can
Right.
and you can hear the roots of blues music in the banjo music. And then of course North Carolina was a beautiful place to cut my teeth as an old time banjo player, because there were so many wonderful players that were around at that time. There still are to this
Mm-hmm.
day. There were so many wonderful players around that played in both styles, and guitar and banjo style, and so I just took it all in.
That's
It
great.
seems like a good opportunity because a lot of our guests are five-string players, and honestly, a lot of our audience are five-string players as well. It seems like a good opportunity to maybe do a real quick. What's the difference? What's the difference between a plectrum and a tenor and a five-string? And Dave, you're in
Sure.
that world as well. So maybe just maybe a minute or two, if you guys don't mind, for those at home who are maybe wondering. I know Maz B is a guitar player looking to stretch into banjo. She's on the chat, or he's on the chat right now. So give a quick breakdown of those main styles.
Yeah, if you don't mind a little bit, Dave, I'd love to know a little bit of more information about the four string, because I actually found out about it after I began to play it. I didn't know about four string playing or anything about the history of it beforehand. So I've always kind of meshed them together. So I mean, I five string is associated with the early African banjo and a lot of the African and Caribbean derived instruments that came over with enslaved Africans, and then over many years it becomes a factory instrument and goes to this whole translation.
Mm-hmm.
So that was always my journey all the way through. But I knew four string was a part of the jazz era, but I really don't know more about its history specifically.
Yeah, the history on the four string is fuzzy, definitely. Yeah, it all came. The five string is the original, more original banjo, and the four string is a variation on, on the banjo, coming about in the late 19th century. Both the plectrum and the tenor. I play the tenor, and I've tried to find the true. I've asked a lot of people about the true root of where the tenor came, and there's no defined of where, because tenor is the incorrect term musically for the tenor banjo, because it's
Mm,
soprano, alto, tenor, bass from high to low,
mm,
and tenor is not a lower tuned banjo. By its name tells you that it is a lower pitched instrument, but it's not at all.
mm,
It's there's the history that the one kind of story that I've heard that I kind of like to go with because it makes some sense is there was a tango craze in America, not Argentinian tango, but and they had orchestras playing it and violas, and it was called the tango banjo because it's tuned like a viola, and the string section could play this instrument, and and then somewhere it got morphed into tenor banjo, some incorrect thing that happened somewhere along the line. Nobody really knows because it's the term is wrong. And then the plectrum I know came about at the same time, but the plectrum is what is a flat pick, and they just called. I think it just came about because he played it with a flat pick. Um, But it was all for that, that era. Jazz wasn't invented yet, so it was that ragtime era, where, you know, and where there's other music other than just other than kind of you know is playing that when you're starting to get that European classical, morphed into American music sort of thing, which jazz was kind of created out of, and ragtime.
Absolutely. Well, I brought two special banjos with me to kind of demonstrate this point exactly. One of the banjos, I'm going to skip the 5 and go right to 6 real quick here. And this is my good friend Big Head Joe. And this is a custom-made
I love it.
string banjo
Yeah.
that I found many years ago at Retro Fret in Brooklyn, New York. And years ago, I went to one of their New Year's Eve parties, and I found this banjo in the back. And of course, you notice the size of this banjo. I mean, just to give the audience at home just a comparison. I mean, look at this. I was transfixed to play a banjo this size. One, because of the size, because of course, as a performance artist, you can't beat an instrument that looks like this. And then and it sounds really lovely too, which even makes it better. But I was also very interested in this instrument because it looks so much like the 6-string Gibson banjo that Papa Charlie Jackson, one of the early pioneers of country blues and jazz, he created an instrument that looked very similar to this one. And so for years I've played one of his numbers, and I'll do it in his style. I usually play it on the 4-string, but I'm going to play it in Papa Charlie style. This one's Your Baby Ain't Sweet Like Mine, just to give you a little sense of that different style. Because what's interesting about the 6-string banjo in general is it has a very thin high end. So it's a little thin up here, but as you get lower, all of a sudden the mid-range and the low mid-range, all of a sudden you have this beautiful bass voice that comes out of it. So when you hit a G chord, even conventional picking, it takes on a 5-string-ish quality just by picking it. But you can also play fancy jazz. And you can do Piedmont picking as well. But let me do Your Baby Ain't Sweet Like Mine here, just to give you a little taste. Everybody talking about the sweetie nowadays. I got the one with the sweetest ways. Your baby may roll a jelly fine. Nobody's baby can't roll it like mine. Your baby ain't sweet like mine. She bake a jelly roll all the time. And when I'm feeling lonesome and blue, my baby knows just what to do. Yes, sir. She even called me honey. She even let me spend her money. Never has a baby put me out door. She even buys me all my clothes. And we don't want to brag, just want to put you in line. Your baby ain't sweet like mine, oh no. Your baby ain't sweet like mine. Sweet like mine.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the great things in that style of playing, and you hear it in old time string band, guitar playing too, is that those bass runs is that you're doing. Um,
And this instrument is absolutely made for the bass runs. I actually have a theory that at some point, the guitar banjo shared a space with jazz guitar where there was a whole bass system in which people were learning how to play bass runs, because I happen to notice in a lot of early bluegrass it tends to be all bass runs
yeah.
until maybe the late 40s, maybe, when it changes over into the sort of the more modern era. But I have a theory, because Papa Charlie's whole style is similar to Jimmy Rogers' style in a way. It's the same
Mm-hmm.
lick, but I think of it as jazzy Jimmy Rogers. So he does, and if you
Yeah.
just go, and you can do the same sort of licks, or even Lead Belly tends to use a lot of the same.
Mm-hmm.
And those sort of bass runs are a part of the lexicon. And I have a theory that banjo guitar might have had some influence at some point, or there was a way to play it that was
Uh-huh.
specific to bass runs. And this instrument was made by a fellow named Robert H. McGinnis, who I'm actually still looking up information on. He was a African American luthier who actually branded the Clef Club brand instruments for James Reese Europe's banjo orchestra from the teens, the ragtime
Yeah,
orchestra.
yeah,
So
yeah.
one of the instruments that was made for that fateful day when actually they broke the color line at Carnegie Hall in 1912 with their 120 banjo orchestra.
Wow.
Yeah, and so this is a really interesting instrument, a beautiful inlay as well, just for all of you banjo heads, because a lot of people don't get to see this part
That
because
is nice.
you don't get to see it because I'm playing, but just a really beautiful inlay. Also, this very interesting truss rod bracing.
Yeah, that bar, there is interesting. What function is it that doing? What is it connected to?
I have no idea. It
Right.
seems like it should be reinforcing, but it's just there.
It doesn't look that strong.
Uh,
Looks pretty.
I got a new head on it recently, but it came with its own pick guard, and then
Uh-huh.
the lights were broken, but it came with its own lights in the back to heat the head as well on this old time banjo. And there was a beautiful receipt from the hardware store from 1921 when the guy bought a little piece of door framing to make his own little homemade capo. And it's like a piece of door framing that has a wing nut on it. That it's in the case, but
Right.
very interesting
Wow.
instrument. But yeah, just another one of the mysteries of the banjo, though, that came into my life.
Yeah, and that rim, that was standard for everybody. Standard banjo rim is 11 inches across. It's your most standard. There's 12-inch rims, but how big do you think that is roughly?
That one's about 18 inches altogether.
Yeah, so it's a lot bigger.
And even when I bought the instrument, I thought it was so similar to the Papa Charlie Gibson banjo that you can see in the one picture of Papa Charlie Jackson.
Hmm.
It actually has the same tail piece on this banjo. But when I bought it at Retrofit, the man behind the counter actually pulled out one of those Gibsons, and it's actually 16 inches in diameter. So it's actually somewhat smaller than this banjo right here. So even for what I thought was a one of a kind banjo, this other one of a kind banjo is even more larger and more interesting than the one that from a legend.
Right. Yeah. And have you always played with a thumb pick and just your fingers, or is that something you've started to do of late?
This I've always played with the thumb pick because well, it started out because I kept dropping the flat pick in the guitar sound hole, which is a not uncommon thing when you're
Yeah,
learning.
yeah, definitely.
And I went to the music store and saw the thumb pick. I could never figure out how to make finger picks work on my fingers. My fingers, I don't know, for some reason, they don't like to pick like that. But the thumb pick was nice because I could get the precision like I was playing a plectrum style, but I can
Hmm.
also finger pick since I tend to do a lot of Piedmont style. And I remember the first time I saw pictures of Lightning Hopkins or Lead Belly or any of
Yeah,
the Texas
exactly.
blues singers, I saw they all had thumb picks, and I said, "Great, that's I'm on the right path." And it was like the same time that I've developed a style of playing slide banjo, And I remember the first time I saw a picture of Gus Cannon with a slide banjo, he had it laying across his lap.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that I did when I first was experimenting. So every once in a while, I'll run across a historical photo that'll confirm some sort of interesting experimentation.
Right, right. It's always good to see that. It's like, am I just crazy doing this? Or no, some other people have done it in the past. Make great
Yeah,
music.
you know, and that's a style that I really just, you know, I don't get to play it often, but you know, well, all I got with me right now is a. Let me see, rolling my sweet babies on.
Sure.
Yeah, something along those lines, you know. But again, these are little styles I picked up as I was trying to experiment with the sounds of the banjo, you know.
Yeah. And do you ever up pick with a thumb pick too? Do you hold it like a flat pick when you're?
Uh, every once in a while, but generally I usually down pick everything because
Uh-huh.
I never really tried to do
Right.
much double thumbing. And early on, when I actually watched a great video of Doc Watson, he said I never did no double thumbing, and so I just decided I wouldn't try double thumbing much. And but I end up doing some. Since I have four strings, I've learned over time how to jump around, not having a fifth string in terms of figuring out how to make it sound like a claw hammer or frailing or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then also I've been my 1 5 string I've been experimenting with a bunch has been my little Gourd banjo.
Oh wow.
Nice.
I love that. That's amazing.
Is that a vintage instrument or is that a recreation?
This is a recreation. Yeah, this one was made by banjo maker Bob Thornburg, who I got to know through my old friend Mike Seeger,
Uh-huh.
and Mike used to play this wonderful gourd that Bob made for him, and when he made mine, he made it into a little family tree on the back, and
Oh, wow.
he decided to incorporate the Sankofa birds. And very early on in the banjo's history, I began to evoke the word Sankofa, which is a West African proverb, which means go back and fetch it and bring it to the present, bring the things from the past into the present and let them guide you into the future. And so these little birds depict that sort of journey going forward, but touching their back wings as they're flying forward to represent the lessons they're taking forward. And the
Wow.
banjo, of course, is one of those instruments that I feel is Sankofa personified because it really takes on the musical cultures of any type of music, and you
Yeah.
can technically play banjo with anything. And that's one of the things
Yeah.
that's just so beautiful about the instrument. That's always driven me in
Right.
searching for new sounds, you know?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Right, you gotta give us a run.
All right. Looks like it's going to make it this time. Let's see if we can get a little bit of how about a little bit of John Henry? This is the first one I ever heard Joe Thompson play. I heard he and Bob Carlin play this one years ago. Dear driving man, don't you see, Lottie? Dear driving man, don't you see? Died with a hammer in his hand. Died with a hammer in his hand.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah, that was beautiful. What's just real quick? What's the wood on the fingerboard? Do you know? I was trying to look at that.
This
That was,
actually, Bob had some extra black palm wood that he
oh,
used for this one, and so even for the headstock, actually, my wife and I uh, actually decided how we wanted to do the headstock. I have quite a few banjo books on the history, including America's favorite instrument,
yeah.
the Banjo and Roots book, Black Banjo Songsters, and quite a few of the other books on early mid 19th century banjo. And so we ended up looking at a whole bunch of the headstocks, and we kind of gave Bob about 5 or 6 of them and said, "Hey, can you do something that's halfway between all of these?" Because since once we started to look at the family tree on the back, we really wanted to make it a family heirloom, and so we thought that just really evoking that sort of ornate style that tends to be a part of early banjo history. It was really just a fun thing to do, and also since it's a
Yeah.
modern instrument that plays, it's also a great demonstrative piece to show in educational settings and in my concerts.
It's amazing. It's a beautiful looking instrument, and a lot of us, I'm sure, have seen you on various TV shows over the years. Talking about the history of the banjo, and I know this is one of your passions. This is what you love to do. It seems, with an instrument like that being played, which sounds so wonderful, it seems like a perfect segue just to really let's delve into that a little bit. Give us your best take on the history of the banjo. We all know, I think that it came from Africa originally, and the modern banjo is quite a different beast to what it originally was. Um, Take us there. Take us on that journey and teach us, that whole transition.
Well, one of the things to know about the banjo is a symbol of everything that is progressive and also everything that is regressive in the United States at the same time. And it seems very strange to start out my comment in this way, but from the very beginning of the birth of the United States as we know it, the banjo uh, has shown up as a presence amongst enslaved Africans. And so you have stories of, you have many different types of West African and actually many types of instruments from all over the continent that sound a lot like the banjo or look um, like the banjo in one way or another. A lot of what they call spiked lutes and semi-spiked lutes. Like for example, this is a spiked lute because the the neck goes all the way through the instrument, and then there are other
Okay.
ones that they don't all the way go all the way through, like a guitar is a semi-spiked lute. But there are a lot of different instruments in those families, and over time, probably the memory. That's the main thing is the memory of these instruments came over because in African music making culture, you have to be able to sing what you're going to play before you're actually given an instrument, and so there's a cultural musical practice of memory of what you're supposed to do, the rhythms you're supposed to make, and how you're supposed to make them and their functions. And so you have that translating into the Caribbean, again, through the plantation system in the Caribbean. They found the banjo in Jamaica and Martinique specifically. And then you find the banjo making a resurgence by the 1820s, 1830s, 1840s in the United States. So it's a gradual process of music making that goes all the way into the United States. And then by the 1840s, you begin to have theatrical performers who are using European models of musical theater. Music hall is a later version of this, but they're if you think back on Shakespeare and the play Hamlet, there's a small traveling theatrical troupe in the play. You have to think along those sort of lines. These older European styles came over to the United States, and within that, the makeup of the clown matched with the African slave and became the blackface minstrel. And the blackface minstrel show was a show that was not only theater, but it was also political satire for the things that were happening on the political and social scale. And so the banjo became a symbol of the Blackface Minstrel Show. Of course, the Blackface Minstrel Show's jokes featured horrible stereotypes and derogatory images of African Americans within the setting of the plantation or the city or any place where African Americans would go, especially after they were emancipated from freedom. And the music took this quality that was very dark, but also those were very dark times. And, you know, so you have to fast forward into the 1890s to the era we're speaking of. The banjo becomes elevated as a semi-classical instrument because there's a movement to codify American music as an idea. And the banjo was a part of that. But they created the symbol of the banjo to be a classical instrument that's played in the parlor by women. And so now a divergent banjo tradition begins to evolve that is semi-classical beyond just the folk roots of the banjo. And so by the 1920s, you have the birth of the recording industry. You start to have music diverging into, again, semi-professional folk musicians, non-professional folk musicians, professional folk musicians, and then any type of popular performer who might incorporate the banjo, from people like Teresa Vaughan, who was a white woman vaudevillian who was she played a little orphan character in her musicals, but she featured a buckabee banjo, so it became popular that way. But you also had blackface performers using them. You had ragtime performers, pop singers using them. During the era when Hawaiian music becomes popular in the First World War era, the tenor banjo almost takes on a ukulele quality, and they make the ukulele banjo. And every step of the way, the banjo starts incorporating other aspects of instruments of the United States. And so we get up to the 1940s, of course, bluegrass and old time and becomes a part of banjo music. Early jazz is a part of banjo music. And then by the 1940s, you start having a divergence again. You have the Scruggs style develops in a three-finger style. And then you have Pete Seeger's folk banjo method book going out. And that creates for the first time, an academic version of what people were doing on the porch. And so again, that becomes a divergence that turns into, you know, newgrass and every other type of music that comes along. And of course, how I came along was a resurgence of traditional music. And I always tried to push the old time styles. So like, for example, Gus Cannon, not many people were playing that style. So I decided to bring that style forward, as well as the other songsters, which is why I ended up taking the moniker of the American Songster. But banjo is it's quite a wide net.
Yeah, it's got, and when you say like progressive as well as regressive, you know, it just goes to show it's like that evolution for the instrument. It's a lot like guitar in a way, or other instruments, to where you take a Robert Johnson who was playing, you know, and then look at the contrast between him and what Clapton did, or Hendrix did, or Steve Vai did, or something, or any of those guys. You know, it's just a completely different take on a similar instrument, and it evolves as it goes along. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's really fascinating. Have you had a chance to go out to Africa to kind of get? I know Bela Fleck did it when he went and filmed "Throw Down Your Heart." And
I would love to go out to the continent. I've had several casual invitations, but I haven't had anything that's come together. You know, it's funny, when I went to the Black Banjo Gathering in 2005, Bela was there, and he had just come back from Africa, and he was telling everyone about how he had this amazing trip to Africa, and one day he would do something. So when Throw Down Your Heart came out, I emailed him, and I was like, congratulations, because I got to meet him. And again, I was 23 years old when I met him, so I was a young, impressionable banjo player, but to get to shake Bela Fleck's hand at one of these very special moments in his own musical career, it was just it was really neat. So I've always wanted to do more. Of course, I've gotten to know a few different players. Actually, you know, I got to guest star playing the rhythm bones. Unfortunately, I didn't get to play any banjo, but I guest starred on Baseku Kuyate's last album, Miri, on a tune called Fanga, where I'm playing the rhythm bones with him. But hopefully one day I'll get to do some African banjo, because of course, big influence is Taj Mahal. His album Kulan Jan is always in the back of my mind when I think about the the Africanizing of the banjo's sound, especially in an interpretive sense, because there's a holistic thing you have to do where you have to kind of take the music in a different direction, I guess, if you will, where as an African American performer or person of color, I'm again, in case people don't know, ethnically I'm African American and Mexican American. So
for those who hadn't picked up, yeah.
I have two identities that I think about when I interpret my music, you know, and the Gourd banjo, and recently I actually did a series of shows with a group called Pasatono Orchestra from Oaxaca, Mexico.
Wow.
And,
I was just about to ask that.
They told me,
play into it.
you know, and they told me they have their own tenor banjo tradition, and they played me a series of numbers that are traditional Oaxacan Mexican banjo songs, but they're played with double banjos.
Oh, really?
You know, and again, I didn't know much more about the tradition than what they had told me, and I only had just a little bit of time to be with them. But these are the sort of things that just looking for that type of imagery, looking for those types of history in the grand scheme of things, it's led me to a couple of amazing discoveries that even when I first started, I never would have guessed I would have seen something like, again, Oaxacan tenor banjo tradition. I never thought that anything like that existed, but it was beautiful to be able to juxtapose that with the music I've been working with as well. So when interpreting, you know, one of the things I do is I tend to like to try to, I don't know, reduce 50 books down to just a small 3-minute segment so that people can understand culturally where music is coming from. And that's something I just try to do very consciously. And as a musician of color, I've never made a point to talk about my race when I'm performing, but there are stories that I can tell that have allowed people to hear the message. Because if you think of African banjo, Pete Seeger mentions that the banjo came from Africa in the first paragraph of his book that came out in 1949. But why has it taken so long for people to recognize that that is a fact? It's hard to say, but it's not that the information wasn't ever there.
No, and it needs to be out there a lot more. You know, I think the stories that you tell, you know, just in the weeks coming up to this, I spent more time than I normally would watching videos of yourself and others, Rhiannon especially, talking to people like David Holt. You know, that was a big move. Seeing you talk about this at the Earl Scruggs Center, I think it was 4 years ago.
Yeah, that was about 4 years ago. That's correct.
You had that same banjo with it, but it's fascinating, and those stories and the accurate history of everything needs to be sold. You know, it's absolutely there. This is why we have you on, sir. It's a very important fact of what we do as a company. You know, we're a banjo company, and I think a lot of people. We know this to be true. A lot of people who are not familiar with the instrument, when you say the word banjo, they kind of automatically gravitate to Earl Scruggs, you know, or the Beverly Hillbillies, that kind of real mainstream, certainly more recent history, shall we say. And it's not until they start delving a little deeper, like I can see on the chat right now, a lot of people are familiar with what you're talking about, and they know it, which is great. You know, I do have a couple of questions. There's two or three very, very keen Brazilians on the chat today, and they are super excited, and they want to know, have you ever had a chance to hear any Brazilian banjo music, and if so, what did you think?
Oh, I have not heard this Brazilian banjo music. Just the American Songster at Gmail. Send me anything down that you'd like. That'd be amazing. I am familiar with music like fado music and a couple of different folk styles of music, but I have, you know, again, the international banjo story is of more so than anything else is still a story that is far unrepresented in the world of banjo. Of course, the African American banjo is one of the biggest stories because it is really the link to all of the modern banjo we know now, because of course you have to imagine the world's banjo cultures don't have to just come from Africa, but Africa can mean multiple things based on the history, and that's one of the things. Again, I would love to hear more Brazilian banjo specifically. I'd love to know what that means and what that tradition represents in the grand scheme.
I'll have to
Yeah,
find
I got
out
a
for
chance to
sure.
go down to Rio a couple of years ago, and at, during Carnival, and was I I think of myself as fairly well versed on the history of the banjo, but I was shocked. There's street performers coming up to you with a banjo. You know, it's a four-string banjo. It's essentially a style of almost a tenor banjo with nylon strings. You know, it's different, but it's very very close, and playing samba music, and it works perfectly. You know, it's amazing. And then yeah, it's just always whenever you open that door and there's another. I remember a few years ago when I discovered Jamaican mento music, and I didn't know anything about it, and then it just like wow.
Yeah, and that's what I'm more familiar with when it comes to some of the Caribbean styles. I got introduced to that style of playing. It's funny enough, there's the ragtime picker Blind Blake, but in the 1950s there was a banjo player Blind Blake. His name was Alphonse Higgs, and he recorded in the 1950s. And so by accident, I found a Blind Blake record that was a calypso record, and he
Hmm.
was a beautiful four-string player, and he played a lot of great songs like "Jumpin' the Line" and "Hold 'Em Joe," a lot of stuff that like Harry Belafonte recorded, but they had two guitars, a banjo, and congas, and the other guy switched on upright bass. Really beautiful banjo playing. And so I started to learn a little bit of that style. Like when I used to play with Layla McCalla a whole bunch, and she used to do a song called oh, Rosemarie, I think she would named it. I can't remember. When you play backup, it's hard to remember what the
Yeah,
name
yeah,
is.
yeah,
Even if you play it 100 times, you're like,
yeah,
what
yeah.
is this?
Oh,
Someone says, what's the verses to those songs?
right.
I remember one person asked me what the verses to Sourwood Mountain were, and I was like, ooh, that's a good question. Then I started to sing it, and I started to know them, but it sounds like,
Right, right.
but there was a part in it because it was a two-chord song. But there's a certain attack that I've always tried to keep, and that goes back to every time I've listened to any type of Caribbean music. I just have always, instead of hitting a note, just I've always, or even back when I did the song Mahala, I always treated that kind of like a Caribbean number, even though it's a South African number. Um, this is I remember seeing a video of Hannes Kotsier play this on the guitar with the spoon in his mouth, and the melody was so beautiful. I thought about Pete Seeger, how he adapted like Blue Skies and all these different tunes onto the banjo, and I thought about changing it, and it came together like this.
I
Yeah.
love it. I like it. I like it. I like it. So the other part of the historical element that I know you've really embarked on, throughout, particularly in your solo career, is the history of the Black Cowboy, which I'm going to be completely ignorant. That was not on my radar. You'd be surprised by that maybe, but it was fascinating. I heard you talk about the Buffalo Soldiers. I heard you talk about Stagecoach Maggie and the kind of the first Cowboys of the West. Really, can you delve into that a little bit? And certainly that's a Jamie Deering interest as well. I will point that out. She explicitly asked because she was curious as well a bit more. So.
Oh, absolutely. Well, with the Black Cowboys, it was a really interesting project to put together. But this history, again, if we start to think about the years after the emancipation from slavery, there's a certain period of time where the United States began to move out westward. But it was before you had strict jurisdictions as we think of now with all of the West Coast states. And so you had these periods of time where you had working people that were working independently. Of course, Black Cowboys is the jumping off point, but it's all based around the idea of finding work and building a better life for oneself. And I used a bunch of songs from the cowboy canon that spoke to this idea. One of the ways I used Big Head Joe, I took a tintype of Big Head Joe for the liner notes, but I also took a moment to record a song in the style of Henry Ragtime Texas Thomas. And on the Black Cowboys record, I featured Big Head Joe and the Quills to showcase some of the style. And for when I started to play Henry Thomas's style, I always tried to get a little bit of the oscillating bass that reminded me of the bajo sexto. So I always tried to get a little bit of a Tex-Mex feel. And then also I did that on Going Down the Road Feeling Bad and Knox County Stomp. Had put a little bit of a Tex-Mex feel on both of those songs. But here's a little bit of Charmin' Petsy, featuring the Quills, just like Henry Thomas used to play. I'm going down the mountain, Charmin' Betsy, going down the mountain to a lead. If I never see you no more, do Lord remember me. Last time I seen Charmin' Betsy, want anything that you see. Last time I seen Charmin' Betsy, she wearing that ball and chain. Yes, I'm going round the mountain, Charmin' Betsy, going round the mountain to a lead. If I never see you no more, do Lord remember me. Now, Charmin' Betsy's going on down the line, wine glass in her hand, going after her old man. These are the very words she says. She's gonna say, oh my babe, take me back. I've done the well, Lord, take me back. Sunday morning won't seem wrong. You gonna call me, I'll be gone. Now make me one down on your floor. Make me one down on your floor. Oh, make a pallet soft and low. Won't you make it so your man will never know? Oh, make it so your man will never know. Make it so your man will never know. Oh, make a pallet soft and low. Won't you make it so your man will never know? 'Cause I'm looking for that bully of the town. I'm looking for that bully of the town. I'm looking for that bully can't be found. I'm looking for that bully, lay me down.
Nice.
Wow.
Very good.
That was amazing.
And one of the things I wanted to do was that Henry Thomas's music is a part of the East Texas songster tradition, and I just wanted to just encourage a little bit of that blending of the songster tradition of East Texas with the cowboy tradition, because a lot of folks who are into Lightning Hopkins and into Leadbelly and Henry Thomas, we know that this is a part of cowboy music. So I just wanted to gently bring that into the project, and that was one of the ways I did that with banjos. I did a little bit of Leadbelly on the banjo as well as some Henry Thomas on Big Head Joe.
Love it. I love it. It's such a diverse. It seems like every time you pick up or start singing or playing a banjo, it's a different voice entirely. You know, it's a different period of time almost. You know, it's fascinating. And you were playing you play a bunch of other instruments as well. I saw an amazing video of you playing the bones with David Holt.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
That was cool. I think he was playing banjo and you were playing the bones along with him. How did that come about? How did you get into playing things like the bones?
Well, like the bones, right when I moved out to North Carolina in 2006, I went to the Mount Airy Fiddlers Convention, and there was a lady that met me that saw the rhythmic way I was strumming the guitar, because at that time I was really going for the big strums, because in the group I kind of wanted to drive the music, so I always did wah, wah, wah when I was strumming, and you know, she saw the way I was playing and thought that I should learn to play the bones, because she just thought that my sense of rhythm would make sense. And my background started in drumming, you know, so it was sort of a full circle for me. So that was my only formal training in high school, was playing drums. And so the idea of, and it wasn't just drums, it was percussion specifically. So the bones fit hand in hand with my formal training on percussion. And in old time music, there are drums and percussion a little bit in old time music, but of course this is an area of contention for many people. Part of the reason is, just like with guitar playing, drums can smooth out the whole ensemble, and folks that like it old timey like the jagged edges. And so for me, I always tried to keep the jagged edges, especially with crooked fiddle tunes. I always tried to make sure to come up with rhythmic patterns that would accentuate the jaggedness instead of the straightening the jaggedness out, because I felt that that was something I thought was really exciting about a lot of the old time fiddle music I listened to, because it wasn't conventional and it didn't fit 4/4 patterns. And so I made parts that fit those unorthodox melodies.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And the bones are great for the banjo, especially with the Gourd banjo with the bones. And especially a lot of the music of the mid-19th century. As a bones player, if I can find someone that plays circus jig or any of those type of numbers from the banjo instructors, there are such beautiful spaces for polyrhythmic experimentation between the banjo and the bones. In all of those, the Briggs banjo instructor and the Converse and all those tunes have a lot of room for that. So it's also really an exciting time in the past decade, we've seen a lot more interpretation of that old time music instead of just the one or two who were playing it before. So also as a bones player, it's been an exciting time for banjo, just because so many people are starting to play so many different styles. It used to be are you a claw hammer or a 3-finger guy? Or you might be a long neck Pete Seeger player, but you know, that's the third party, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or a jazz banjo player, and that's in another house, you know.
Yeah.
That's very true.
That's where I'm usually hanging, you know. Looking for the George Lewis jam, you know.
I love it. I love it. Now, actually, on Styles of Music, we have a gentleman in the chat. He comes every week. Alan Jones. He's in the UK, and he was asking, have you ever dabbled with any Irish or traditional Irish music, kind of outside the US and
you know,
into that area?
My main experimentations into Irish music have been ballad singing. When I do my ballads, I think a lot about people like Jeannie Robertson and Davy Stewart and people like that, and those are very big influences on me. But banjo-wise, I haven't really done a lot with Irish music. The only thing I ever did really with Irish music that was of note was on one of the Drops albums, Heritage, that came out many years ago on Dixie Frog. I did the Real Old Mountain Dew. secondary guitar part, banjo part I put together to go with the 5-string banjo at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Started to do. You know, but that's not a style that I've spent a lot of time with. But I can, if I was to get into a jam and I knew the song well enough, I might be able to fake my way through at least, just because I've listened to a lot of pub session music, but I've never tried to get good at the style itself, even though I've always loved it. You know, Pat Mahoney, I'd gotten to see him many times. Anyway, that's a style of banjo I just wish I could get into. Too many notes, though. I like the polyrhythmic stuff and one chord stuff a lot of times. So I'm still stuck on one chord. I'll get to 3 one day.
Maybe that's next in your journey, in your banjo journey. One thing we kind of talked about this off camera just a little bit, and then we got some questions from the chat as well. But you know, a lot of our audience for sure know you from Carolina Chocolate Drops, as I'm sure many people do. But you know, you've since embarked on a really quite successful solo career as well, and I'm curious how the balance was between like creating and recording as a group versus now doing it on your own, and kind of what has changed in those processes as you create your music for your solo career.
Well, you know, I modeled myself after my good friend Mike Seeger for many years, and having just seen his albums as both a soloist and in the band, the New Lost City Ramblers, I just thought that I should try to do that too. I asked Mike about it at one point. I said, Mike, how do you balance a band and a solo career at the same time? How would you recommend I go about that? And he said, don't. But I went and did it anyway, just because he was a, you know, just I always had my individual ideas about how I wanted to go about music, in addition to doing the music in the group. So I never think of it as two separate entities, but there were in a group you always have to compromise. You always have everybody else's ideas, and you have to figure out ways to work everybody's artistic expression and statement into the music of the group. And in my own solo music, at least when it comes to banjo, I was never the main banjo player in the Carolina Chocolate Drops. I had a couple of songs I played banjo on, but I wasn't ever the main banjo player. So in my own solo work, I tend to show off a lot more of my intricate styles that I've picked up over time within my own solo work, just because in the course of a show, there was never enough time for me to show off all the styles without it just being my own show compared to it being everybody's show. So that was one of the things that's different about a lot of my solo work, as well as a lot more blues and a lot more jazz influence within the scheme of the music, because that's definitely closer to my heart. You know, I still love the fiddle and banjo music, but it's just blues and jazz is more of my banjo style in of itself. So people will hear instantly that there's something familiar, but they'll know that there's a little bit of a different flavor when they hear my solo stuff, just because of that alone.
Okay.
Sorry, I muted myself. That was my fault. I was frantically typing in the chat. I didn't want you guys to hear all the crazy typing.
Great. Thanks for all the questions so far, folks. Really appreciating it, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a lot of fun. I know we're in an hour and 10 minutes. I know you said about an hour, so we're not going to keep you too much longer. But we wanted to talk about licks a little bit as well, particularly one particular style of lick, and the hit 'em up style. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Oh, sure. Yeah. You know, I don't get to talk about this that much. You know, last year I did a tour in Spain, and for the first time in a long time, I heard the song "Hit 'Em Up Style" on the loudspeakers. And, you know, a lot of you backup musicians will know this. I jumped back into playing position like I was on the road in 2010. I just I heard because the song starts out with the fiddle, da 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 da, and I heard it, and without knowing it was on the speaker, in my hands just did, because I just did that for so many years with hearing Rhiannon's fiddle. And so when we first started bringing this song into the group, it was just 2 chords. It was, you know, we took out 70% of the song itself and made it just a chorus. And with those two nice chords. We've spoken a lot about the samba, and we've spoken a lot about Caribbean banjo. I wanted to take a few of those ideas when I came up with this part, but I also was thinking about the song "Leaving Trunk" by my good friend Taj Mahal, and how it has sort of a thump in his version of "Leaving Trunk" has Jesse Ed Davis doing. And that's a funky rhythm, and I just always have loved that. So when we started to come up with how to play hit 'em up style, I just kind of a hard hammer on. So that just seemed like a nice little hip hop lick, and so I just kept on over the years embellishing that. So at first it started out with da 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 da. And if we got hot, I'd be able to do it. And then a little hammer, a little pull off. And it just became just hits, kind of like I'd gotten to see another good set of friends of mine, the Avett brothers, for many years. I got to see the way that they did hard hits with the banjo, especially early on when they were really hitting the big stadiums and stuff. They used hard hits to really emphasize the point of the banjo instead of doing intricate banjo. And so for hit 'em up style, there was a combination of that, a little bit of that Taj Mahal, but a little bit of that hard. And the crowds just loved it when we started to play the song, and that's one lick that I did. Your baby ain't sweet like mine on the 4, since I got it. And I got to experiment with some of the jazz.
And when you're strumming with which finger?
Sometimes it's with the pointer finger, and sometimes it's with the middle finger. And if I'm doing a frail, part of my frail style is it's
like a Spanish guitar thing.
Pointer, thumb, and then middle finger a lot of times, and then I get another extra strum. But that goes back to when I used to be in a ranchera band, and they taught me this strum where it was, the the ranchera strum is fingers, thumb, fingers. And so even in banjo playing, sometimes, when I used to play a lot wilder, nowadays I don't tend to do this as much. If I really wanted to get crazy back in the days, I do that. And you can really get into some really interesting strumming patterns. I did Poe Black Sheep earlier, where from listening to Uncle Dave Macon, there's a whole series of ways to be able to get the mechanics of your banjo tricks down and things like that.
Fabulous, yeah.
So cool, so cool. Well, I have a few questions, if you don't mind answering a few before we start to wrap up here. You good for time? You got like
Oh, sure, yeah.
5, 10 minutes?
Let's fire away a little bit. I've been doing a lot of banjo examples. Let me get some of these questions out here since people are wanting to maybe want to know a few things.
Yeah. So we have a couple of people specifically um, asking about the Black Banjo Gathering and how they can be more involved in that particular community and be more involved in that old time of music. What advice would you give to anyone looking to try and get into that world a little bit more? Are there any, I mean, events obviously not exactly right now, but websites, resources out there you can recommend?
Well, one of the things that the hardest thing about this type of music, especially with African American string band music, is there's no singular unified area that you can find all of the information. I would again inquire that you can email me at theamericansongster@gmail.com and I'll see what I can do. But what I would recommend is the same thing Mike Seeger recommended to me. Be as specific as possible with what you're trying to find first, because there's so much information out there, especially with old time music, so many different recordings and so many ways you can approach the music, that be as specific as possible, not trying to get all the information. And then you will find that you'll be able to get a lot more information out of things. So when you email me, just be real specific. Like if you like Doc Boggs's music, I have information that can, there are extensive interviews that Mike Seeger did with Doc Boggs talking about how African American banjo players influenced him beginning to play the banjo, things like that. I have those things, but if you were very specific, I could try to lead you at least down the path you're looking to find. Yeah, that's what I could say about that. Yeah, I'm always open for it.
Yeah, very generous offer on your part. Thank you very much for supporting it. That's a big deal. It kind of leads into another question with regards to, let me read it and do that. The idea of using banjo's multiracial history as a tool for unity, basically, particularly as we live today. Would you agree with that? And how do we increase the diversity of banjo players?
The first thing I would say is you have to get people to like the music. It's always about the music. Of course, the banjo was actually it was in some ways it was reappropriated by Pete Seeger because he made it more of a political and social tool as a part of his act. And that's one of the ways that the banjo became very political as something that is consciously being done. Before that, it wasn't necessarily an instrument for social change, but nowadays in the modern age, you can't help but think about the banjo and not think about racial justice in some sort of way. Because of course there have been a lot of conversations about what material should I learn, what material shouldn't I learn, but you have to think back, what do you like about the music and why are you wanting to learn it? And that will lead you every single time. A lot of people ask me, how do you keep from performing material you're not comfortable with? But I don't perform material that I'm never comfortable with. If I can't sit and talk with you about it, I won't bother trying to interpret a song that I feel is just as easily in the vaults without. But if you need to pull out something that is evocative, I would always recommend think about why you're doing it. Why do you need this in your repertoire, and what effect are you trying to make on the audience? Because it would just be just as easier to share that information without performing it. So that's a little heady of an answer, but that gives you kind of some insight to think about when looking into all the different types of music, because it's quite diverse in terms of the history, good and bad, and every other type of thing in between. I mean, just musically, it's very hard to. It takes a long time to start being able to pick out, hey, that's a version of that John Henry's a lot like the Kentucky String Ticklers, isn't it? Like that type of, it takes a while to be able to discern, like, hey, that, and that even itself can be its own journey.
Absolutely, and you said it a few times throughout this discussion. It's about the music, right? That's really the fundamental part. And I've said to most of my life, really, since I've been playing music, is I feel like it's the one thing that all of us have in common. It doesn't matter if it's the same genre or whatever, but the idea of making music and melody and rhythm and all these kind of attributes really are the thing that tie us together as human beings. I can't think of another thing off the top of my head, but would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, between that, the only other thing is maybe food that can tie everybody together in such a way, but music is one of those things, though. You can you can get a lot of people together around some beautiful music. And then for me, I use it as a tool because that's why I make the written materials. Because then hopefully I'll have done my job as an artist and you like the song and then you might want to know more. And then I happen to have written materials that say, here's the more info you might want to know. And being a big fan of people like Sam Charters as well, I also like to leave my discoveries open-ended so that others can journey. Because I can't do it all in one lifetime, you know. So who knows what someone else might find? Someone might find a banjo bigger than Big Head Joe, you know.
Maybe that's the challenge for Deering. I think a 22-inch rim. I think we're venturing into drums at this point.
There's that bass
Right.
banjo always that's out there. That that.
Oh, that's right. Uh-oh.
Oh, yeah,
Don't call the Banjo Museum up. They'll pull out the biggest banjo that's ever been made.
I love it. As Dan Meza, our good buddy Dan, who's in the chat today. Hey Dan, he says the physics of vibrating strings is the same everywhere. Couldn't be more accurate. I think I would agree with that statement. Um, one last question to wrap up here. I think, given the history, given everything as the banjo is today, which is again, like I say, it's a very different beast to what it started life as. Where do you think it fits in culture today with everything going on?
You know, it fits more so than ever, I think. I think that there are, let me think of how to describe it, because the banjo has had so many different evolutions. I've been glad to see banjos more present in popular music than I've ever seen them before, in a general sense. That's
Yeah.
a beautiful thing, because before they were usually only bluegrass banjo if you saw it in a mainstream popular culture version. Of course, in terms of the old time communities, there are a lot of newer, younger people that are coming out, that even folks that I haven't met that I still need to meet, that are doing their own version of the same journey that I went on. So I'm excited about that. Yeah, I mean, again, you know, like our friend Dan said, the physics of strings vibrating is what holds us all together. And I think, I mean, there are a lot of different ways that those strings are still holding us together even to this day. You know, I mean, that's kind of where how I feel about it in general. You know.
100%. 100%. All right. Well, I'd invite you to share any closing thoughts, final thoughts for the day, Dom. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you to play us out some. But any final words of wisdom?
Oh, well, I mean, always the final words of wisdom are keep on trucking, keep on picking, and keep on playing. And you know, this is a very special time here in the early 20th century in 2020. We have so many opportunities to be able to reanalyze the history that's already been written about this music and be able to correct it or expand it. And that's what I've been trying to do for the better part of 2 decades. And I've been pleased with the few things I've been able to do, but there's so much more that still can be done. And of course, some things are being unearthed every day. You know, like the fact that I found this banjo and have tried to sing its praises everywhere. I've only done so much like I can, but like I said, that next person with the bigger banjo, they might have a little something different. But if you keep on searching and keep on playing, you're always going to find some new songs and some new music. And let me go ahead and hit a little bit of Keep On Trucking to evoke a little bit of the sound of one of my old mentors, Boo Hanks. And he taught me this old Blind Boy Fuller number here. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And again, it's Deering has been a wonderful company to work with for many, many years. And I hope it's many, many more years and many more banjos and many more tunes to play.
Absolutely. And before you jump into that, just a quick note, Dave. Any final words from yourself before we part ways?
Just want to say thanks for doing this, Dom. And this
Yeah.
was, it's a lot of fun, and yeah, it's just great, great to talk with you and great to hear you play.
Yeah, really, really cool to do that, and so much positivity in the chat. I will say the chat today has just been frantic, way busier and involved than normal. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Do check out deeringbanjos.com/live, and Dom's video will be up there tomorrow, and it will be on our YouTube channel about 10 minutes after we wrap up here, so you can view it again if you wish. And don't forget, IBMA is next week, so stay tuned. Dom, play us out, my friend.
All right, keep on trucking my blues away. Keep on trucking, mama, trucking my blues away. Keep on trucking, baby, every night and day. I got a gal that's a little low, says she love me, but she don't know more. Keep on trucking, baby, trucking my blues away. Oh yeah, trucking my blues away. Keep on trucking, baby, trucking my blues away. Keep on trucking, mama, every night and day. I got a gal that's a little low, says she love me, but she don't know more. Keep on trucking, baby, trucking my blues away. Oh yeah, trucking my blues away. Go ahead and get a big hit, Joe. Oh yeah, keep on, man. Hey.
Yeah. All right. See you next time, everybody.